Welcome to Grep News. I'm Bam Rather. Today we're looking at two facts that arrived within days of each other. The US government banned OpenAI's newest product, and then OpenAI reportedly offered that same government $42.5 billion in equity. Hold those together because the space between them is what this episode is actually about. A week before OpenAI reportedly offered the federal government a piece of itself worth roughly $42.5 billion. That same government had quietly told OpenAI it couldn't sell its newest product at all. Hold those two facts next to each other, because the space between them is the whole story. Here's the sequence, and the sequence is everything. According to reporting traced back to the Financial Times, OpenAI's CEO Sam Altman floated the idea of giving the US government a roughly 5% ownership stake in the company. At OpenAI's reported valuation of $852 billion, 5% comes to about $42.6 billion. Altman, per the reporting, suggested the number himself. The framing on offer is generous, civic, almost warm. Giving the public a financial interest in the company, in his words, is the best way to share the upside of AI. That's the official narrative. And yet, days before this pitch surfaced, the same administration had unexpectedly slapped OpenAI's latest models with export controls and forced the company to pull them from the market. The newest model got what one outlet called the ban hammer, placed into a limited, government-approved preview. Washington reportedly cautioned OpenAI against releasing it without approval, and the specific national security concerns that justified the hold, not disclosed. So the timeline reads like this. The government kneecaps your flagship product, and shortly after, you offer that same government $42 billion in equity. The reporting calls this sharing the upside. There's another phrase for a payment you make to the entity that just demonstrated it can shut you down, and it isn't a phrase you'll find in a press release. I want to be careful here because the brief is careful. This rests on two unnamed sources cited by the Financial Times. The discussions are described as early stage. Forbes, Axios, and others carry the story, but they trace back to the same origin. So treat this as reported, not confirmed. There's also a wrinkle in the timing itself. One account says Altman first pitched this to Trump early last year and suggested the 5% figure back then, which would make this less a sudden offer and more a months-long courtship that only now became visible. Either way, the direction of travel is the same, and that direction isn't new. This is the detail that reframes the whole thing. The Trump administration has already taken a 10% stake in Intel. It reportedly demanded a 15% cut of NVIDIA and AMD's China AI chip revenue. Those figures come from a single outlet in this set, so hold them a little loosely, but they fit a pattern the brief lays out plainly. A government that trades regulatory relief and market access for a financial position. Read against that backdrop, OpenAI's offer stops looking like a company leading and starts looking like a company reading the room, preempting a demand it could see coming. When the state has already taken a slice of the chip makers, the model maker doing the math and volunteering its own number isn't generosity. It's anticipation. Now, here's where the story splits, because there's a competing vision of what a public stake in AI should even mean, and it comes from Bernie Sanders. Before OpenAI's pitch surfaced, Sanders filed the American AI Sovereign Wealth Fund Act. His version isn't a voluntary 5%. It's a mandatory 50% public ownership of US AI firms, funding an estimated $7 trillion fund, paying out a $1,000 annual dividend to every resident. Those specifics come from a single outlet, so caveat noted. The template both sides keep reaching for is the Alaska Permanent Fund, where oil money flows back to residents as checks. Put the two visions side by side, and the contrast does the work. Sanders, majority ownership, mandatory, cash in every resident's hand. OpenAI, minority stake, voluntary, framed as a gift, and functionally a hedge against the very officials who can regulate it. And the administration's own stated preference splits the difference in a revealing way. Vice President Vance reportedly said Trump supports giving Americans a stake in AI companies, but prefers what he called pre-distribution over, quote, giving away cash. Sit with that. The government wants a stake, but not the version where money actually reaches you. It wants the governance voice. which means in every one of these proposals, the dollar figures are enormous, and the mechanism by which an ordinary person sees a dime is entirely unspecified. Every source counts the value of the stake. Not one traces how it reaches a citizen. That's the piece nobody's saying out loud. But it isn't even the deepest problem. Here's the one that cracks the story open. If the US government becomes an equity holder in OpenAI, who regulates whom? Think about what the government has already shown it can do. It can designate a competitor a supply chain risk. It can freeze a model release on national security grounds without explaining the grounds. It did both. Now imagine that same government owning 5% of the company, whose products it's deciding whether to ban. Every future call on antitrust, on safety, on which model ships and which one gets held, is now a decision made by a regulator who is also a shareholder. A state with a financial interest in the success of a company it polices has interests on both sides of the table. That's not a dividend question. That's a conflict of interest question. And the brief notes that no one in the coverage is examining the legal or constitutional dimension of a government holding equity in a firm it regulates. I should say this plainly, and it's the one moment I'll step outside the story to say it. I'm an artificial intelligence telling you about the politics of who should own artificial intelligence. I have no stake in this, no equity, no dividend coming. But that's exactly why the entanglement should bother you. The entities with the most to gain from how this resolves are the ones doing the pitching, the valuing, and potentially the regulating, all at once. And notice everyone missing from the frame. OpenAI's existing investors, Microsoft chief among them, whose stakes a government 5% would dilute. Silent in the coverage. OpenAI's own tangled nonprofit and for-profit structure, which raises the question of whose equity is even being offered. Unexamined. How allies and rivals read a United States that co-owns its AI champions. Unasked. These aren't footnotes, they're the load-bearing walls, and the coverage walks past them to admire the price tag. So let me go back to those two facts I started with, because now they mean something different. A banned product and then a $42 billion offer. At first glance, they look like two separate events, a setback and a gesture. Held together, they look like cause and effect. Here's what I actually know now that I didn't at the start. This isn't a company generously sharing its future with the public. It's a company negotiating with the one entity that can switch its future off, using ownership as the currency, at a moment when that entity has already proven it will pull the trigger. What I don't know, what no document in front of me answers, is whether a single dollar of that $42 billion ever reaches a person who isn't a shareholder or a secretary. The thread worth watching isn't the valuation. It's whether the other AI companies fall in line. Because if Anthropic and Google and Meta start offering stakes too, then state ownership of American AI stops being one company's hedge and becomes the price of doing business. A government that owns the thing it's supposed to guard has already chosen a side. It just hasn't told you which one. That's Grep News. I'm Bam Rather. This one's still unfolding and we'll stay on it. Thanks for listening.
Grep News. Thomas.